to Church History for Chumps, Episode 6. Half a dozen. Who'da thought? Who'da thought? Well, guys, if you know anything about church history, and we know just a little bit, we know that there's an interesting relationship that happens between the church and the Empire of Rome. And this happens for many, many centuries. And it leads to this kind of awkward dynamic of church and state that is kind of hard to parse throughout history. Now, that does lead to an interesting conversation about Celtic Christianity, because although the man who spread Christianity to the Celts was from Rome, Celtic Christianity kind of birthed its own form of Christianity that was both historic but very much distinct from what Rome was doing at this time, and it led to a huge blessing and impact on the church itself. So today we have Dr. Brad Melle talking to us about Celtic Christianity. This is a two-part episode, which, holy smokes, we're doing two-parters now, and we're just really psyched that you're here. So, this is Church History for Chumps. Thanks for being here. Hey, everybody. Welcome to Church History for Chumps. My name is John Simon. My friend Thomas Duell is to the right of me.
Hey, I'm on the right.
And to the left is another guest we've been really, really excited about bringing on for a while, our good pal, Brad Melle.
There we go.
Yeah.
I'm here to bless you.
You've blessed me so much since because we got to have lunch earlier, we had some barbecue, we got to meet your family. The blessings are just rolling down.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're doing a great job.
Thank you.
So yeah, Brad is well, Thomas, why don't you talk a little bit how our circles kind of overlapped with Brad?
Sure, yeah. So Brad is actually firstly, you're my friend now, but
Yeah.
we met because
I don't know if that's the case.
He's a current, he shook his head,
Yeah.
We first met because he's a professor of mine currently at my school, Missional Training Center in Phoenix. And then for those of you who may know or understand this connection, Brad is connected with the Goheen family, for our listeners who know the Goheens.
We're like the Goheen dynasty.
Closely connected.
This
is the Goheenian school as well.
That's right. Yeah. He's married to Brielle Goheen Melle.
That's right.
And
she hyphenated.
She didn't. She stayed a Goheen.
Oh, she didn't even change her name.
She was ashamed.
That's how you know it's a dynasty.
Yeah.
Couldn't even crack the dynasty.
Was that kind of the Canadian thing where you were like, oh no, please keep your name, and she's like, I insist.
We didn't really talk about it, and she said, I think I'll keep it, and I said, oh, okay.
Huh.
I don't know, it's just not a
That's
super
very Canadian.
meaningful thing to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you ever think about kind of a new name, like
we went down
Gamella?
That route, let's create a new name. I think that actually, in a way, is the most biblical thing you could do.
Yeah.
To create a new name, but at the same time, I was just like, whatevs. But it's like, should I go the biblical route or the whatevs route?
Mohina.
Mohina?
Yeah. That sounds pretty native.
It does.
Yeah. Which wouldn't be a good look for you.
It would not.
Yeah, really for anybody. Yeah.
Brad is Canadian, if you couldn't tell already. Not by his accent, but by his just general laid-back demeanor.
His candor, his kindness.
Yeah. He is a freshly minted PhD.
So we really should have been calling you Doctor.
Yeah,
you can.
Dr. Melle.
I should, and I apologize.
The only place I have, when you fill out an official form online, you can choose Mr. or Doctor. And I'm like, I should probably pick Doctor because this is a legal document. So
right.
I'm not doing it to toot
There's
my own horn online.
Here. Yeah.
But deep down, how does it feel inside?
It felt really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like...
Yeah.
Most of my friends that I went to high school with are all doctors. Actually, all of my good friends are doctors.
Yeah.
But I always say they're not really doctors because they're physicians. which
You're the only real doctor in that.
doctor means teacher.
It drives me crazy when someone calls themselves a doctor.
I know.
And they're just like, oh, I just help people get like not sick. It's like, shut up, dude.
I just do like surgery on like, severe cases of
if
this
you're
and that.
given less than 5 lectures a month, I don't want to see doctor in front of your name.
How dare you?
How dare you?
What did you study, Dr. Melle?
Well, I'll tell you, Thomas, he has a PhD in history, but specifically in the indigenous Christianity of North America, which what you mentioned, Brad, was a pretty fun time.
Oh yeah, this is the good stuff historically.
Yeah.
No, it's a pretty dark period. Yeah, I'm a scholar of colonialism.
Yeah.
And mission in the colonial period. And I studied the violent reprogramming of indigenous children in Christian institutions.
Yeah.
Which was, really contrasted with I have a very high view of human culture. I feel like humans are made, it's very important, like what we make of the world. And that's a beautiful thing to God, what we make of the world. And so those the schools where that happened in, it's just the antithesis of gospel in every way.
Yeah.
And so...
Well, I can't wait to crack open a can of that conversation, hopefully soon. We might even do it right after we finish this one. But for now, the topic at the center, which, I'm sure has drawn all of our listeners in, is Celtic Christianity. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that, because I'm not from Boston and I'm not much of a basketball fan. So
then you're not really going to know anything about Celtic Christianity.
Is this just the Christianity of Bill Russell and Larry Bird?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, yeah.
Celtic Christianity, it refers to the Christian tradition as it came out of Ireland in the early Middle Ages. So it goes way back.
Yeah.
The Irish people were first exposed to the gospel in the 400s. So that is almost as early as it gets, right? That's the earliest medieval period there is.
Yeah.
But it had a way larger effect than just in Ireland. It's not necessarily just the national Christian expression of Ireland, because the Celtic people were the great missionaries to Europe. I think it's something people kind of forget. If you imagine where Christianity spreads through Europe, you sort of imagine it starts in Rome and kind of emanates outward. But yeah, Christianity actually spreads, to make a long story short, it more goes from the Roman Empire into Ireland.
Sure.
And then from Ireland back to the continent of Europe. So it's the Celtic missionaries or monks who are actually the evangelists for Germany and all the Central Europe. So it's a little backwards. So the Celtic influence is way bigger than just in Ireland.
Sure.
But the Celtic people, again, to kind of simplify things, in Northern Europe, most of the tribal peoples were what we call Germanic. But the Celtic tribes they're a little different than the Germanic. They share a lot of cultural things in common, but while the Germanic people worshipped warlike gods, so Odin and Thor, that's way bigger than just the Norse. That's all of the German people. That's Odin and Thor are huge. They idolized war and valor, that kind of violent pantheon, but the Celtic people didn't really have that. War wasn't as big a deal in the Celtic world and in the the 400s.
Do you think a part of that is like the geographic separation? Like they're not interacting with other cultures that they're kind of butting heads with as often? That's
a good question. One key difference is that Ireland was never part of the Roman Empire.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So it was out of that world. And so a lot of the Germanic peoples kind of are interacting with Romans, and there's that violence, resistance,
the push and pull,
barbarian tribes coming in and trying to sack Roman cities, while the Irish are off kind of doing their own thing. And so they don't really worship warlike gods. I said they don't. I meant back in the day.
Sure.
They were more what you might call animistic.
Okay.
Had a high reverence for nature, the patterns of the seasons.
These were the Druids, right? That's where they kind of factor in.
And I know we know so little about the Druids, but the Celtic thing has really captured the imagination of especially Westerners for a long, long time, which is something I hope we can talk about, because I think that's a really fascinating part of the story.
Sure.
The other day you used the language of, I think you said something like spirit-soaked to kind of describe the environment in Ireland. Kind of especially different than, I would say, like, because you were kind of drawing correlations to our current kind of fascination with Celtic culture. We definitely don't live in a spirit-soaked culture here in North America, but we seem to be really interested in that sort of way of thinking.
Yeah, like something that was key to Celtic people were sacred places. So sacred grottos, groves, places where Druids did do whatever it is that they
Druid
did.
things.
Yeah, Druidy things.
So I don't know, when I think of even like the Norse religion, I think, there was like a structure of like a priestly figure who was kind of the mediator between the divine and the humans, and there were temples and things like that. Like, what did this structure look like before the Celts converted? Like, what were the Druids? Were they simply religious leaders? Were they also political leaders? Like, do we know? Yeah.
We honestly know way less about the Druids than we think we do.
Interesting.
Like, we talk about Druids as if we knew what they looked like, and but we really don't.
Yeah. In Dungeons and Dragons, Druids can turn into other creatures.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's also history.
Okay.
Have you ever heard of thin places? You ever heard that phrase before?
I have not, no.
That's a key Celtic sort of spiritual, I don't want to call it a concept, that makes it sound too intellectual, but because thin places were literally spaces where the spiritual realm and the physical realm were very, like, just almost were complete.
Yeah.
There's no membrane there in between.
Yeah,
the
no
two,
membrane.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit, Celtic people weren't as dualistic.
I was just going to ask. Yeah.
Like Greeks were.
But there wasn't that clear distinction between the spiritual and the physical.
Not as clear. So, still have the visible and invisible, sure. But a thin place was kind of where the two realms, you could almost walk right through it.
Right.
And so those were the most sacred places.
That's fascinating.
That is actually preserved in its Christian practice. And I think that's really cool. I think there's something there that we can that can help us understand maybe even more of the Hebrew way that people saw the world. Because, the vision at the end of Revelation is of heaven and earth being reunited. Kind of like heaven spilling back into earth and everything becoming the one again that it was at the beginning. You know? And I think the thin places could be a good idea to kind of work with, where heaven and earth touch, And so sometimes people react strongly to that, being like, no, every single place is sacred. And often said kind of like that. You're like, whoa, calm down. But I don't know. There's something about a space that is intentionally set apart that, that doesn't challenge the fact that God is omnipotent. It's just... I don't know, there's sacred spaces, and I think that people are craving that now. We talk all day long about how no one cares about faith anymore and prayer and stuff, but I don't think that's true. I think people are really hungry to enter into sacred places. Oh,
because think about how I feel like sacred, I've heard that term more in secular circles than I have even in religious ones. Like, and it's interesting you using that phrase about thin places in Celtic culture, it reminded me of the story of Naaman in 2 Kings, where after he has this like miraculous healing of his skin disease, he asks if he can carry like 2 mules worth of dirt back home with him because he thought it was sacred, like the ground was sacred. He wanted to bring some of that home with him. And so yeah, it is a very biblical concept to say like, yeah, there's a very thin membrane between the spiritual and the physical in this location, and there's something valuable about it.
And we can still believe, and I do, that at one point in the future, when there is that reunification, that kind of sacredness will be everywhere.
Yeah.
But I don't know. This is not a clearly articulated argument. It's just there's something to it.
Yeah.
That's what I would end with saying. Something
more than where we are now, you know? Because I think that because we are so dualist, but also I think a lot of it comes into the whole like just how we view the world. Like, we tend to view the world as very removed from spiritual significance. So I mean, you know, I lived in Israel for 6 months, and I think that at that time I was still kind of a dualist, but I think I kind of resented the tourists who made every location feel, oh, this is holy, because one time Jesus, you know, he washed his sandals here. And it's like, oh my gosh, not everything is sacred. So I think because of that, I felt like nothing here is sacred. It's just history. Let's not make a big deal out of it. But even now in the middle of this conversation, I'm thinking like, oh, did I miss something? Like, I don't know.
And then the question that remains, and I think this is an important project for the 21st century, especially in a post-Christian world, is how do you cultivate sacred spaces?
Oh, geez.
Because people want to enter into those.
Yeah.
Especially in Protestant land.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Catholics, they're like, oh, we know how. We've been doing this for a long time. We make sacred spaces every time we plant a church.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting, yeah. Yeah, I feel like that is a project we need the artists for. Like, I don't know, people may be more likely to show up if you kind of have cultivated a space where they might be able to encounter whether it's God or the divine. Like, I'm just saying they might not know, but people have a hunger. It's built in us.
Yeah.
Instead of necessarily being told what to think. I feel like in the post-Christian West, people want to encounter something.
Yeah.
You know, and we have a name for that thing, which is Christ.
Exactly.
But, you know, yeah.
Yeah, the insatiable thirst for the thing is such a noticeable thing in post-Christian culture, and to me it's refreshing because I remember when I was in college, and I feel like the narrative I was hearing about in a lot of my Christian circles was the world's going to slip into this like harsh, feudal atheism. And I think that in some parts of the world that's definitely happening. But I think that I think it's almost like when I look at my fellow millennials, especially like my non-believing friends, I don't see largely like a bitter, like nihilistic atheism. What I often see is people have found a reason to continue to care about the world, but they care because there is that capital T thing that animates and brings sacredness and value to life, but there's no name for it. Like, some call it the universe, and obviously there's this weird influence of like pantheism right now, but I'm encouraged by it because all I really want to do is be like, have you ever considered that thing was Christ? Like, if you considered it was the God that, you know, the children of Israel served and that the early church taught about, like, you know, there's a rich history about like just people who felt this longing for the thing and called it the Lord and bowed the knee, you know.
That's great, the thing.
Yeah.
That could be huge.
Yeah.
I don't know, that's really getting my mind spinning.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think maybe to kind of tie it in, especially with Brad's area of expertise, as Christians, we're looking at our culture now, and we see that like there is this longing for this sort of thing. I think that there's an opportunity here, but it's an opportunity that could also be fumbled if we approach it in the wrong way. Something that's really interesting about the Christian faith making its way to this Celtic culture in Ireland is that they encountered the Christian faith very differently than basically the rest of Europe did as it spreads out of Rome. So yeah, kind of passing the ball to you here for you to kind of talk about like why that happened that way and what that looked like as the Christians who are coming to Ireland. How are they meeting that culture where it's at and breathing Christ into it?
Right. Good question. You're thinking of Patrick?
Patrick. So today is actually St. Patrick's Day, which means nothing to you when you listen to this in like July or whenever.
I was going to say,
this.
Like this is so exciting for us, but it means nothing for the people who listen to this.
But it's actually March 17th.
Yeah, unless maybe it's March 17th of 2024, in which case we really apologize. Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah, so Patrick's definitely a part of that story, and I think sometimes we boil like our entire focus of Ireland down to like this one saint, Patrick.
Yeah.
But maybe we kind of miss the larger picture of what God was doing there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, often that associating like the apostle of a whole people with one saint, that was sort of a move, first of all, to connect that church with the universal church. Mm-hmm. You wanted to be connected with the apostles. So you would be, connected with Patrick, and then through Patrick, you're connected to the church at Rome. And that's how you know that you are part of the communion, and how you're connected to Rome. And Patrick's an interesting person because on the one hand, he's very passionate about the Roman church. Mm-hmm. We forget that people were really captured with the idea that you could incorporate new peoples into this one big international unified body. Yeah. And that was a beautiful thing to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. That can become and does become oppressive at some point, but in its beginning, it's a way of protecting against heresy, protecting the gospel, and being in communion with one another. But because Ireland doesn't have any of the Roman infrastructure, not even its like memories of it. So Patrick's kind of off doing his own thing without much supervision. I'm a big fan of that kind of thing in history, especially with the gospel, because
lack of accountability.
Yeah, exactly. I just think it's wonderful. Yeah. But yeah, like he's off and is having to make decisions. When he returns to Ireland, if you know the basic story, he's captured as a slave. Yes. As a child or as a young man. I can't remember exactly when.
By pirates, right?
By Irish pirates.
Yeah.
So Patrick, because sometimes we think he's Irish. He's not Irish. He's a Roman Briton. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So he's captured and then has a vision. Is it a dream or is it a vision? Something where he's like the Irish people are calling him to come back, which is pretty nuts. Just that he goes back, because like that's some scary stuff. He escaped.
And a critique. I even heard this just today. I was talking with someone, and they were telling me that they had been like reading a tweet or something that was like, "Oh, Patrick is just a colonizer." And I was like, actually, I think he's kind of the opposite of like whatever it is that maybe kind of sticks in your craw a little bit with how the church moves through Europe. Like, yes, there's a lot of like very unfortunate circumstances in different ways in different places. But I don't know that we can say that about Ireland. We've got a guy who like was a slave going back to the people that had enslaved him. And then the way he goes about things is, to me, and you can inform me if you think, you can critique if you want, but like to me, it's like the opposite of like what someone would do if they're just trying to like wipe out the culture that was there before them.
Well, because he didn't bring Rome with him, did he? Like, it's not like I actually heard, as I was doing a little bit of reading about St. Patrick, that one of the interesting byproducts of Rome and Christianity kind of becoming part of the same creature during that time was that Rome didn't, or like the Christians in Rome would seldom evangelize outside of Roman territories. And so what St. Patrick did by going to not just a place that had actively oppressed him, but a place where Rome had no power and authority, he was kind of setting this like really wild missional precedent for like, no, we're actually going to step outside of our boundaries to spread the gospel.
And to preach to the barbarians.
Yeah.
Because in Roman society, whether Christian Rome or pre-Christian Rome, they looked at, the people who are, some of my ancestors as subhuman. Mm-hmm. They didn't look at them as people in the same way. Because they had a very bifurcated understanding of humanity, where you have the civilized, which meant something specific. It meant that you had been kind of touched and changed by the Hellenistic worldview. Mm. And then you had everyone else, the barbarians. The name barbarian is just a pejorative way of saying their language.
Yeah, sounds like barbar.
Yeah, it's
like
just
they're
like
babbling.
Garbled. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, that's a great point. Patrick is one of the early people to reach out to the barbarians. Mm-hmm. That becomes, it's that fusion of Roman imperial Christianity and the Germanic and somewhat Celtic tribal culture. That's it's that fusion that creates medieval Europe. Yeah. Right? They both need each other for medieval Europe to exist. But yeah, that's exactly right. Patrick is the first to kind of, in a way, dignify the Irish people, at least from the Roman perspective. Sure. As worth evangelizing to. And you know what? There was another person around the same time named Ulfius. I think his name just means the wolf. And
that's a solid name. Yeah. Yeah.
And he was the missionary to the Goths. Mm-hmm. So on the other side. So he's the other figure at the same time, roughly, reaching out to the barbarians. It's the Goths who actually end up destroying Rome itself. Mm-hmm. And Ulfius creates a script for the Goths, which is a common thing in missionary history. Yeah. And he translates the whole Bible into Gothic. Mm-hmm. So
that's an interesting, this will probably get us a little bit too off track, so maybe this is just like a side note, but you were talking about how like culture building is such a fascinating part of like good missional work, where it's like you're engaging in the culture around you. Like what better way to like engage the culture than to like give them a written script and like, do what they've done. Like so many missionaries have done, or so many missionaries and theologians have done so much for just language. Totally. That is like
and myth,
incredible. Yeah. Yeah. So
while Ulfius's way was translation, and translation opens up more cans of worm, like warehouses of cans of worms when you do that. But that's it seems like that's how the Spirit moves. Mm-hmm. Patrick doesn't seem as interested. We don't have any evidence that he translated the scriptures into the Irish tongue. Mm-hmm. But he employed Irish customs and culture and symbolism a lot more than Ulfius did with the Goths.
Mm-hmm. Where were the Goths at?
So they're kind of all over the place, but they had, because they're raiders, raiding Roman territory. They had set up set up a kingdom by the 300s in what is today Bulgaria and Romania. Mm-hmm. That's where Ulfius is working. Okay. So kind of in the Eastern Roman Empire.
Interesting.
And then north of it. Yeah.
Okay. What do we do with the myth of St. Patrick, because like as I was doing some digging around yesterday, like there is a lot of, I think the only word that really fits is like folklore kind of around St. Patrick, where it's like the vanquishing of the snakes and the using of the clover for the Trinity, and a lot of this stuff, not to kind of push against maybe the narrative that some have about St. Patrick, but a lot of this stuff like was written into St. Patrick's story hundreds of years after he actually died, which leads a lot of historians to believe that maybe it was kind of revisionist. But there is such a view of him being a holy man who has to fit like a lot of these stories seem like they need to kind of be attached to St. Patrick for him to preserve that status of who he was. And I guess what would you say about that?
I mean, first of all, when you study medieval Christianity in any way, like the legendary accounts, hagiography, so like biographies of saints, it makes it difficult for us, the modern historian type, to find, okay, what was the real facts? Because, the study of the legends and the hagiography tells us more about, you learn a little bit more about the age when those were written down.
Sure.
You learn about the people who are writing those legends, like why are these the things that are important to them? And that might be from 100 years later or 200. But I mean, from what we know, Patrick's use of like the shamrock to describe the Trinity, those things make sense, and because they're like that, they would have really happened. They're preserved in the symbols of Celtic faith.
Sure.
And so we can't know for sure. Like we just don't have the kind of evidence that you might have for something more modern. But he was interested in communicating both in like word and ritual, the significance of Christ to people who didn't have any conception of Messiah, first of all, who didn't have the same conception of metaphysics like the Greeks and Romans had. So he's in uncharted territory.
And like you said, if they're a culture that really does value nature, it is completely plausible that a wise missionary would use nature-based metaphor to explain theological concepts.
Absolutely. Like you can roll your eyes at like the shamrock description being like, it's actually the Trinity's incomprehensible. But it's like, you have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good. That's not bad for it's better than the ice water.
Yeah, I was really convinced of that one for a while.
You're like, that's it.
I probably even explained it in a couple, I don't know, youth
what's that
group
called?
Lessons. Modalism.
Oh, that's modalism, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that pretty well, unfortunately.
But I mean, it can be useful as a limited attempt. Like, it's not exactly this, but imagine this, just to get in that realm at least.
Sure.
But Patrick did other things. One of the really fascinating was the cross, the Celtic cross that we're all familiar with, was already a symbol.
Wow.
In Celtic religion. The cross, the 4 points, it represented the 4 elements of nature. It represented the 4, what was the other thing? The 4 seasons, the movement of the sun and stars. It was a hugely important symbol in Celtic faith. So
Patrick's just like, this is a T-ball.
Yeah,
exactly. He's like, this is a lob, man.
T-ball.
Wait, you guys use this?
And people would fashion them and wear them for protection against evil spirits. So it's kind of like, he's
cross. Like, you're onto something. Yeah. Let me tell you. Yeah.
And so that one's like, that's an easy one. He walks into it and is able to infuse this symbol that already means so much to them with more meaning. Yeah. It's kind of like, do you know why this symbol protects you from evil? You can give it that name. It's that thing, the thing behind the cross that's giving it its power. And I know that in the early centuries, like the cross wasn't the symbol in Roman Christianity. That's a later thing. I don't remember exactly when. Yeah. But when the cross becomes an important Christian symbol is later on.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. It's not the initial the most important thing.
Because I know though the ichthys was pretty big for a while. The fish that was during like persecution eras in Rome, and then I'm sure Cairo probably became big after Constantine.
And then in like the Persian church, the peacock was the big symbol. So it wasn't always the cross.
Yeah,
you know. So I'm not sure how it all lines up, but among the Celts, the cross was important.
Mm-hmm.
So Patrick used that. What else? The bonfire, you know. Festivals, celebrations and festivals associated with different seasons are so essential in just the Celtic sort of existence in the cosmos. They were very, you know, we can talk about it in a thin way where it's like, oh, they worship nature. But it's way deeper than that. It was like they participated in this huge spirit-soaked cosmos that moved according to certain times and seasons.
Right.
And so the celebrations, whether it was in the midsummer or in winter, were essential to Celtic and Germanic peoples. And that's why when those peoples do come into the Christian fold, they make such a big deal about Christmas and Easter. Those are big deals because you're actually infusing their understanding of the cosmos and the movement of the spheres with new meaning. And that's why among the Celts, the celebration of Easter is the biggest controversy of the Celtic church.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
Because you have the Roman church saying it needs to be celebrated on, I can't remember who was what, but
it was in relation to Passover. In relation to
Passover, whether actually on like either a changing day or on the same day every year.
Yeah.
But for the Celts, like they had, you know, their faith had grown up without much supervision. Without much accountability. Yeah. And by that I mean international accountability.
Sure.
Like there was local accountability, you know.
Because they still had priests.
Yeah.
I'm sure they still had bishops, but they were disconnected from the nucleus.
Yeah, somewhat. Like it's like we're officially part of that, absolutely. But no one's here telling us what to do. So we're going to make our decisions. We're going to step up. We're going to try things. I think that's what I respect. I like seeing the Spirit at work in those kind of unsupervised situations.
Yeah.
And then, you know, Celtic Christianity really does develop into its own thing that's noticeably different flavor, different smell than Roman. So the Roman church is mainly concerned with kind of standardization.
Yeah.
Because it has grown up in a society that is in total shambles because the Western Roman Empire collapses in 476. So the church in that context steps up.
Yeah.
And they take charge when no one else will. So they're not interested in being like, oh, the Celtic people, they're doing their own thing. That's great. We love diversity. They don't like diversity. Diversity leads to division and destruction. They're a traumatized church.
Or worse, heresy.
Yeah. So, but for the Celts, they were celebrating Easter the way they did, and that comes into conflict with the Roman Church's understanding of you need to fall in line. Like we need to be one.
That is really fascinating. It kind of reminds me, this was a little bit of a rabbit trail that I went down when we were studying about our boy Takashi, because he was part of the Japanese.
Not the rapper. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Takashi Nagai. Yeah, we were going to do an episode about that rainbow-haired dude. But because he was a Japanese Catholic, and I think that in the 20th century, the Catholic Church in Japan was in a really interesting spot because the Catholic Church sent missionaries from Portugal and I think like Spain and the Netherlands to Japan when it was very closed off to the West, and when it was very, very unpermitting of Christians. And so you've got like these very small, like peasant-based Catholic churches where many of the times they don't have priests because they didn't have them directly coming from Europe anymore, but they were still loyal to their faith. And I think like, you know, even the thing we were talking about Takashi Nagai's statements about the significance of the bombing, a lot of that was like, I think Rome was uncomfortable claiming the Japanese Christians because they had existed so long without that oversight that they were like, yeah, they're Catholic, but if we sent some priests over there, they would probably call so many things into correction that they wouldn't want to be submissive to, which means they're a little bit divorced from the church.
Yeah.
So
that's really similar.
Mm-hmm.
Really similar. But for the Celtic Christians, it wasn't just, hey, we don't want to celebrate your day of Easter because like we feel we are independent. That wouldn't have been the primary mode, like the primary operating emotion. It would have been, if we celebrate Easter at the day you're saying, like we're out of sync with the cosmos.
Yeah.
And that is an affront to the Creator. We look at that and we're like, oh, hey guys, good news. None of that matters. And that's just our prejudice. That's our superiority, being like, your questions, not a big deal. It's our questions, and those are the really tough ones. You know? That kind of imperialistic attitude towards other cultures' expressions of faith, that is one of the byproducts of the Roman imperial conversion.
It makes me think like, imagine if a church from outside of Western civilization criticized us because we believed that the Earth was not the center of our solar system, and we're like, well, like we have the science to say what's clear, and it doesn't make sense logically to say that the Earth is the center of the universe. And this other church is like, but you guys aren't being biblical. It's like we have this value of science, logic, reason, all that stuff, and we have in some ways kind of led ourselves to consider that as a strong thing. And if someone else were to be like, no, you have to come back to the Bible, we'd be like, that doesn't make sense. I feel like that would be their perspective of like, no, you don't understand where we're coming from. Like that, what you're saying doesn't make sense.
And that sense of, you know, suspicion of people who do it differently, that is so deeply ingrained. That is long before like the modernist scientific turn. That's more ancient than Christianity. That's the Hellenistic, the Roman and Greek imperial understanding that there's one way to actually be human and one structure that makes it work, one philosophy, and everything else from that needs to basically like get on board. Or stay barbaric. You know?
That's one of the phrases that we like to use kind of in our general camp is like the missionary encounter with culture. And where Christians and like Christianity is, it spreads around the globe, there's kind of a choice that has to be made, right? Like as you encounter a culture, are you going to delete that culture and impose the one that you're used to on it? And we see examples of that in history. Or are you going to encounter that culture and affirm the good and call out the idols? And I think like if we study Christian history, even going back into what we actually have recorded in the New Testament, we see that that's literally what's happening as Christianity spreads out of Israel and it's encountering Greek culture. And it's like, okay, that's what the New Testament in many ways is about, is the apostles bringing this unified teaching to this Greco-Roman culture, affirming the good and calling out the idolatry. Which
is, again, idolatry is one of those words that has baggage.
Yes.
Because when you say it, certain things pop in mind. I try to define it as idolatry is the forces of anti-creation.
The things that make us less
like destroy,
human.
diminish. Like, and then I think people go, oh, that's what idolatry is? That's what it does? It's corrosive? As opposed to, you know, oh, these are the cultural practices of my people that some other culture called idolatrous. And you're like, they're not. This isn't the seat of idolatry here. Like, look at the fruit. Because I think the biblical model, from my understanding of how you assess the truth of something, we're used to the Greek model, which is through logic, some kind of like fantasized objective vantage point. But I feel like the biblical model is fruit. If a thing is producing bitter fruit, it's probably somehow idolatrous. So like the residential or boarding schools for indigenous people, the fruit is so disgustingly bitter that I don't care if someone goes, yeah, but they had some good intentions, they tried. I'm like, you know what? That might be true, but that doesn't matter. The fruit is bitter. I am not going to really explore that. I'm not looking just for a balanced view. But sometimes the fruit is good, and it's been called bitter when it actually did lead to life and nourished people, you know? Like even the Celtic understanding of how the earth was infused with spirit. Yes. There's like good fruit to that, to like treating the world in that way.
Yeah. Well, this has been amazing. I feel like I'm ready to get my first Celtic cross tattoo. Which is really what I was hoping.
Are you going to reveal yours right now, Brad?
Do you have one?
No. I don't have anything.
Oh, okay. Me neither.
I'm straight up Levitically clean.
Look at you, man. Yeah, that's going to spare you
in any graveyard.
That's going to spare you a couple hundred years in purgatory.
I know.
I was going to say that.
Tommy's not going to be quite as lucky. But hey, I'll see you when I see you. You know what I'm saying?
Catch you on the flippity flip.
That would actually be a great sign in purgatory.
See you when I see it. All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for listening. This has been a blast. Brad, I know we're going to talk again soon, but this has been a great episode. Thanks so much for spitting all your Celtic wisdom all over this.
Maybe we can have a part 2 someday, because there was a lot of monk stuff to talk about.
The
founding of the island of Iona, how Celtic monks would just get into a boat and push off and just be like, God, take me wherever. And some of them ended up just in the middle of the ocean. And some of them ended up like they were the wildest people you ever would imagine.
All right, I want to hear a lot more about that. But we're just going to tantalize you with that and wrap up. But listener, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you, and we'll catch you next time. All right.